All right, guys, we're back in my garage for another video. And I think if I were to mention that the new M3 is going to be all electric, then two things are very true. One is most people knew this was coming. And two, a lot of people aren't very excited about this change in direction, in particular existing M3 owners. And this isn't any surprise. Pretty much every change BMW has made for the past almost 20 years has been something that M3 owners have a very negative opinion on at first. But over time, they start driving the cars, they start to enjoy it, and that becomes the new benchmark. And so BMW has been teasing that this new electric M3 is coming in with some really subtle marketing on their social media. You probably didn't even notice it. But with all of that information they've been sharing, we have a much better picture of why they made the change and the kind of things we should expect when the electric M3 comes out. So now that episode 2 and 3 of the series are released, I wanted to talk about it in this video, so hopefully you guys find it useful. Now, as always, for everybody that's new to the channel, I create these videos to help keep you updated on the latest developments in our community, as well as discuss technical topics so that we have a better understanding of how our engines work. So if you're interested in more videos like that, be sure to subscribe because there will be a lot more coming out in the future. So starting off with episode 2, they kind of indicated that leaving off from episode 1, they had the board meeting and all the members drove the cars and thought it was incredible. They thought it was the best thing they'd ever driven, and they had no idea that this was possible with an M3. But you might be wondering, why should we take their feedback for granted? I mean, what does that really mean in the grand scheme of things? And so they started going back to their roots. And I think this is a big point that BMW is going to reiterate, not just with this Electrified series, but also when the M3 actually launches, is that, they've made a lot of changes over the years that were very controversial and then ended up being very successful in producing some of their most iconic cars. So they started off with the 3.0 CSL being their first real performance rally car that they built that won all of these championships. It had a pretty crazy design at the time, but it worked from a performance standpoint. And then they showed the 320 Turbo, which again is a very iconic car, and being turbocharged, a lot of people told them at the time it wouldn't work. It wasn't meant for racing, but it helped power them through to many race wins and is obviously pretty much the default setup for any modern engine to be turbocharged. So again, very early in the development of that technology, but they utilized it to their advantage and it helped get the performance they were looking for. And then they even talked about the M5, which for those of you that remember, when it first became all-wheel drive, that was a huge deal. BMW has always been known for their rear-wheel drive sports cars, but when they announced that the new M5 was going to be all-wheel drive, it felt to a lot of people like they were trying to copy Audi, or, they were putting this super complicated drivetrain that wouldn't work and give you the driving dynamics that you were looking for. But again, the M5 became iconic. I think the F90 CS is probably one of the best looking modern BMWs out there, and it has the performance to match. I mean, these cars sold like crazy. So even though initially people didn't like it, it ended up setting a new benchmark for what they continue to do with the rest of their model lineup. And again, the M3 is the same way. I have to reiterate this for a lot of you guys that maybe weren't around when this was happening, but I still remember when the E90 came out and everybody was freaking out because they put a V8 in the car. BMW is known for 6-cylinder engines. It should be an inline 6. The V8 is going to be too heavy. It's going to throw off the weight balance. Now fast forward, and the E92 M3 is pretty much a cult classic. People love the sound, people love how it drives, and they don't care that it's a little low on torque because it performs well on track. But then what happened with the next M3? It came turbocharged. It was sacrilegious. People couldn't believe that this S55 was going to be dropped into an M car. But again, over time, it became the new benchmark. Now everybody expects every M car to be twin turbo. So it's just, again, another iteration in that development is this move to an all-electric drivetrain. Now, the last thing they showed was the X5 Le Mans, and this is probably one of the craziest cars that they've ever built, but this was a challenge that they took on to build a performance SUV. So basically a full-body family car that you could drive on track. It had crazy performance. In the video, it was even a manual transmission car, which I didn't realize until I saw these clips. But, the car did the performance that they were looking for, but it was a big handful to drive. It was super heavy, had a big, powerful V12 in the front. It just was never really designed for everything to be packaged together in that sort of car. But They made it work. It was fun, and it just kind of put a new perspective on them of how you can take a powertrain and drive it and then kind of reel it back in to make it work. So they ended up nicknaming that car the Beast because of how crazy and difficult it was to drive. And now they move on to create a new beast. And what it ended up being is that same F87 M2 that we saw in the previous videos. It actually is an electric car as well. And somebody commented this in my last video, and I didn't realize that's what it was because they didn't share it in that video. I must have missed some other behind the scenes or something. But in this video of episode 2, they actually showed that it has an electric drivetrain. The iDrive screen is replaced, and all the iDrive stuff has switches and things where they're basically doing a lot of testing on a full electric drivetrain. So it looks like a regular M2 from the outside, but it absolutely has nothing in common underneath. Now, the biggest issue, again, it was way too powerful. They said they tested 1,000 horsepower, and all they found out is that's too much. It was really difficult to handle, and they had to do a lot of work to kind of reel that back in and make the car powerful, but still fun and capable of being controlled. Oh, and another thing I thought was interesting is they mentioned that they started building this car as early as 2018. So they've been testing for almost 7 years now. And so I think that also kind of indicates just how long they've been considering an electric M3, and they kind of reiterated how much time they've put into development to make sure that this car comes out right. Anyway, so how are they going to control it? And that's where episode 3 comes into place, because they feel like if it's going to be the most powerful and capable drivetrain, it doesn't just need to be able to perform on nice, perfect tarmac on a track. It needs to be able to perform in the worst conditions. So they tested it in the hottest conditions, and as highlighted in this video, the coldest conditions. They basically drove it on a frozen lake covered in snow, and they're doing all of this testing. You can see they're drifting around and making sure that all the modules and everything are working together. But the key highlight in this video is there really aren't that many things that have to talk to each other. Compared to a more traditional BMW, like what most of us have, they have individual modules for every system. So they've got the engine control unit, trans control unit, steering, braking, all of this stuff has to talk together and communicate with each other so that they work in harmony. Now, on the opposite end, with this electric drivetrain, they are starting with one main control unit, the brain of the entire car. And that is what sends signals to everything else so that it all works the exact way it should, and it has a very predictable handling characteristic. So this was probably the biggest change that they commented on, simply because they didn't anticipate this, but once they developed it, they realized that it did everything they wanted older M3s to do that much better. So this was kind of getting all the engineers excited, and you can kind of see in this video how much they reiterate that people on the team believe that this is going to be the best M3. It's being designed not only to meet what the M3 iconic name represents, but exceed it and just push the entire platform to a new level of performance. So I thought that was really interesting. Although, engineers getting excited is great, but you still need to get the owners excited. Hopefully they don't miss that. There needs to be something built into there that gets the people that have already been owning M3s for the past however many years now excited to jump into another one. But yeah, kind of bringing this full circle, the BMW CEO just reiterates that this is the same feeling that they got when they mentioned MX Drive was going to be a thing. They tell everybody that this is going to happen at a big car show, and everybody freaks out and tells them it's the worst decision. And then 3 years later, they're telling them this is the best thing ever, and they can't wait for the next one. So they're definitely really pushing this idea that we are only being negative about it because we haven't driven it yet. And once people get behind the wheel, they'll understand what they've created and just get excited for more. So I think that would be great. I'm still not sure I'm fully on board yet, but it seems like from the comments in my previous videos, some of you guys are, you're interested to see what they can do. You maybe aren't excited to own one, but you're curious what the performance figures and stuff are going to be like when it's finally released and we get the full picture of what to expect. And then closing out episode 3, of course, they post another teaser of what the next video is. This one, again, I'm kind of on the fence about, but it sounds like it's going to be focused on the engine noise, which, yes, they have synthesized noise coming through the speakers to represent what the car's performance is doing. So you can kind of hear it ramp up. I won't post the actual clip in this video, but if you check it out, you can hear it over there. And, it's interesting. I mean, I guess we'll see what ends up happening. I don't know if you want your M3 to sound like a Jetsons car, but hopefully they develop something that's very authentic and not, overly cartoonish or anything. But it does seem like they put a particular focus on developing the sound that the car is going to make. So we'll have to wait for episode 4 to see what that sounds like. But in the meantime, I think they've given us a lot of information that we can kind of dwell on and talk about until the next episode comes out. Oh, and one other thing, if you guys haven't seen the other news, it sounds like there isn't going to be a new M4, or at least they're not planning on a 2-door version at this time. Most of what's being indicated is there's only going to be an M3, which would be a 4-door version of the coupe. I think all of this testing with the 4 Series Grand Coupe might represent that. I don't know if that's exactly what the new M3 is going to be. That was kind of my assumption, but maybe it will just be a more traditional sedan. So hopefully more of that information is shared in the future. But yeah, in the meantime, I think that is it for this video. So thank you guys for watching, and I hope this helps. And if you have any other questions or comments, leave them down below.